Um, I've reached out to a couple of people who I thought would be excellent to sort of kick off this idea of an executive launch. And so the first person that I want to introduce is coming to us from South Florida. So let me tell you just a little bit about Carlos Garrido. Carlos is a Sandler franchise owner in South Florida. He runs Sandler Miami. Prior to that, Carlos was the head of business development, handled global business development for a company called AstraZeneca, which many of you are probably familiar with. And previous to that, he was involved with investment banking firms where he was often the deal lead or lead negotiator in deals. Carlos, on a personal note, is I think one of the most sort of affable and quick-witted guys that I've ever run into. And so I'm thrilled to have him. And one of the main reasons that I've got Carlos with us today is Carlos and his team in South Florida have absolutely been crushing it for the past 2 months through all this COVID stuff. And so I thought this would be a great time to have him on. And so Carlos, grateful that you were able to make this work and join us today. Welcome from Norfolk, Virginia to South Florida. How are you, sir?
Hey, hey, Chad, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great. Video looks good.
Okay. Well, the videos, there's nothing I can do, but this is what I kind of God gave. But I've got a face for radio, but I want to make sure that you're that the voice came over okay. Yeah, I run Sandler in Miami with my business partner and my brother Antonio. We've had this for maybe 6 or 7 years, maybe 7 years now, and we've been we've been doing well during the crisis, during the COVID event. And have we been crushing it? I don't know if we've been crushing it. I mean, I'd like to think we were crushing it, but I'm never satisfied. And I don't think we have been crushing it in reality, but we've been holding our own. We haven't noticed the significant change to our performance and our economic performance. We have noticed this, do you know what? You should be asking me questions, but we have noticed a change in the amount of impact we're bringing people. That's gone way up, but we haven't really, our economic performance has remained pretty static, pretty steady, and that's some wins and some losses. We've had like most companies, there are many clients we work with where we're, in a COVID environment, we're not a great fit, but we've recovered that with clients where we are a great fit for them.
Excellent. And I absolutely want to get into that and some of what you're doing, because I think you're being a bit modest right now, but you have done very well over the past couple of months. But before we get into that, I talked a little bit about your background. Can you share with us kind of what led you to become a Sandler franchisee, coming out of investment banking and running global business development? What led you to Sandler?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a hugely long story. I'll shorten it for the audience. I will have some sympathy with what they're going through here. I was business development, that's investment banking, a variety of investment banking boutiques in the UK, and some big firms. I mean, PwC investment banking team, I'll age myself, Pricewaterhouse before it was PwC. And then I joined in-house BD, M&A work for a big pharmaceutical company, it's a UK pharmaceutical company, AstraZeneca, and they had a very big emerging market strategy. So a lot of the people on this webinar will remember that in the 2008, 2009 time period, every big company needed a BRICS strategy: Brazil, Russia, India, China. And essentially, most companies established an emerging market strategy. They asked for my support to come to Miami, work with their Latin America team out of Miami. I came to Miami. I was doing product launches and licensing and M&A out of Latin America, out of Miami in Latin America, when my brother, Antonio, who was a Sandler client, came to me and said, I've got a great idea. We're going to open up an office in Miami. He was living in the UK. He was running Europe for a big American firm. And he said, I've had this idea, I'm a client of Sandler. They're brilliant. We're going to open up the Sandler Miami office. And I said, well, you might be doing that, Antonio, but I'm certainly, is that weird thing you do when you go to Dallas? Because he was a client of Tom Neeson, for those of us who know Sandler well enough. Is that when you go to Dallas and you start speaking funny? I'm not interested in that, Antonio. And he said, no, let's do it. And I said, no. He said, well, I need a business plan. Help me write a business plan. And because I do, you know, when I was doing private equity work and M&A and disposal work, I can write a business plan. So I said, sure, get me some people to speak to. I'll go and visit some training rooms and I'll write your business plan. And in the process of writing Antonio's business plan, I talked with an awful lot of clients and an awful lot of people like you, Chad, and like me now, that run Sandler businesses. And I dove into the, like, you know, the economics and the work-life balance and how they work and the impact we have on clients. And in doing that due diligence, I fell in love with Sandler. And so, you know, one day we got drunk and I said, let's do it. And we did it.
That's what it took, bonding over cocktails. What's it like? So I know we've got some folks that are joining us now that are in family run businesses. What's it like working so closely with your brother?
I have to say, for me, it's fantastic. I mean, you know, is there a little sibling rivalry? I think that's a good thing. You know, whenever we're working with companies and we are, you know, teaching them, helping them hire, for example, sales team, we always say, I know I always tell people, hire in pairs. Hire in pairs because one will help another and there'll be a little bit of competition. So that sibling rivalry has always helped us a little bit of fuel in the tank. But, you know, more than that, you're working with your brother. Wow. Trust's at the heart of every relationship, right? Mutual respect, mutual trust. Any relationship not based on mutual respect and mutual trust, you've got a problem. And so I've got that. We have that hardwired in, right? It's my brother, for crying out loud. So mutual trust, mutual respect, they're wired in. A little bit of sibling rivalry to fuel the fire. And, you know, Antonio, for those of you who know him, the smartest guy you could ever meet in your life. So I am blessed, fortunate, you know, to be working with my brother.
Good. So take us now to 2 months ago, right? So everything started to change, at least on the outside, right? We all had these new challenges to deal with in some ways, some unique, some probably that we've had previously. But how have you pivoted? How has Sandler Miami pivoted or tweaked or changed? What have you done differently over these past couple of months?
So I think the first thing was, I think I personally, for me, and I think my whole team, either maybe they gave it me or I gave it them. I don't know which way it went, but you know, right from the beginning, I was not prepared to participate in a mindset of scarcity. I just wasn't prepared to participate in it. I absolutely understand that things changed. I mean, we all got, listen, I'm at home, I'm talking. It looks like I'm in my training room. This is the glorious Zoom virtual background. I'm in my bedroom. So, you know, have things changed? Things have changed. And, you know, I always say that we're not doing different things. We're just doing things differently. And so I wasn't prepared to participate in a mindset of scarcity. And I was gonna, you know, and I kind of like challenge, it's in my nature to be a pain in the ass, actually, Chad, and kind of challenge assumption sets. So people that come to me and say, oh, nobody's buying. I mean, that just ain't true. People are buying stuff. Has stuff changed? So is somebody's buying cycle shorter or longer? Yeah, it is. But that's just part of our discovery process, right? We found, what are we in business? What are we all supposed to be doing? We're trying to find people where we can bring value, where there's a good fit, you know, where we've got a good fit with people. Is the value we bring a good fit for what they need? Is our economics, the way in which we economically interact with clients, is that a good fit with the way they want to so we're always looking for fit. Absolutely, is there's been a change. So when this COVID came around, some of our clients, their revenues turned to dust. And so guess what? We're no longer an economic fit with that client. That makes some sense. It isn't a testament to them and it isn't a testament to us. But then there's a whole bunch of other people where we are a good fit, you know? So is anything really changed? No, we're just looking for fit. The fit looks a little different is all it is. I just think that was, I think that was kind of like behind our continued performance, was that we were not prepared to participate in a mindset of scarcity.
I love that. And it sort of brings to mind in Sandler, we sometimes have this back and forth. What does behavior drive your attitude, or does the attitude drive your behavior? And we know that you've got to have both, right? Behavior, for those of the uninitiated, is simply what are you willing to do on a regular basis, right? So whether that's making calls or outreach of some kind, whatever that looks like, those daily and weekly activities are your behaviors. And then Carlos is referencing the mindset, which is the attitude. How do I feel about this opportunity? So let me ask you, what it sounds like you're saying it was sort of your first, before you even took the first action, the mindset is kind of what you dialed in on first, which is we're just not going to participate in any kind of an economic downturn. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. You know, and I'm telling all my clients at the moment, yeah, on a macro scale, there is no doubt that the COVID has ripped, you know, $2 or $3 trillion out of the heart of the macroeconomics of the US, probably $5 trillion out of the global, you know, the global GDP, macro. But, you know, none of us operate macro. We're all micro. On a micro scale, if you're a market dominant, you know, producing or covering 90% of your market, well, then, yeah, those macro events will impact you. But I think when you're a micro, like us, Chad, you and I, we are accessing probably at any point in time a half of a percent of the people, the companies that we could be working with. So, you know, on a micro scale, on the scale of one business or one sales guy or one sales team within one business, there's so much business out there that these macroeconomic impacts, you can choose, and it's a choice. You can choose to say these macroeconomic impacts, I can choose that that's going to mean that I've got some sales challenges. Or you can choose, you know, because is it true? It's conveniently true. And by the way, you're probably finding lots of other convenient truths in your life. It is conveniently true that that has taken some value out of the economics. But it is absolutely true that there is more business in the market than I could ever do in 5 lifetimes. And the same for you, Chad. And the same for probably 99, I think 100% of my clients. There's more business than you could ever, even now there's more business than you could ever do in 5 lifetimes. And so do you want to look at the convenient truth, which is, oh yeah, economic conditions got tougher, macro? Or do you want to look at the absolute truth, which is there's more business than I could ever do? And so what really has changed? Nothing's really changed. It's like people are telling me, oh, I've got to now sell from home. You know, absolutely conveniently true that this is new and uncomfortable, the way we have to do things. But it's absolutely true that until we get out of our comfort zone, we're never going to grow, right? I mean, what does Jim Rohn say? Don't ask for less challenge, ask for more skills. Don't wish it were easier, wish you were better, right? I love that. Don't ask for less challenge, ask for more skills.
I love that quote. And like you, I'm a huge fan of Jim Rohn and his work.
Huge. Yeah.
So let me dial in on some specifics, because I think I really understand the mindset, the abundance mindset that you're bringing to, and your team sounds like they're all sort of bringing to every day. Actionably, it sounds like what you're saying is we got to get better at sorting, right? So, you know, we've talked about this in the past. Prospecting is sort of like sorting. You know, it's finding who doesn't fit. Good. Now that gets me one closer to the next one. I find who does fit. So what do you have, maybe 1 or 2 questions that you think people should be asking prospects right now to determine whether they're worth that pursuit? Is there anything, kind of go-tos that you're using right now that helps sort those folks a little bit better?
Well, I love this whole notion of sorting. Absolutely. And I think that we should be sorting now more than ever. We should be sorting like maniacs. So first thing to do is to look at your pipeline. I'm a pipeline animal, right? I believe in sales, pipeline is the alpha and the omega. All starts, all ends in pipeline. Rock solid pipeline mindset, pipeline process, I lean real. In fact, I was telling some clients yesterday, in my job, when I'm doing my sales part of my job, not my coaching or training part, my prospecting is my sword and my pipeline is my shield, right? My pipeline is what stops people able to hurt me. My sword is my ability, my prospecting, putting things into my pipeline. So we've got this pipeline. I think the first thing to do is to sort that into 2 pipelines. I've got a pipeline of stuff that want to close today, that we've got to close soon because they need our help right now. And that's us. For, if you're selling plumbing supplies, then, you've got a pipeline of people that need plumbing supplies now. And then you've got a pipeline which is, hey, you know what? Get it. We're going to work together, but just not right now. Now's the time to put it on pause. And there's a basket of activity we do with that pipeline that keeps it alive and keeps it breathing. It nurtures it. And then you've got that other pipeline, which is like, hey, you need us now more than I think. I think every client that I'm working with has found their deals are either accelerating or on delay. There's nobody that's just meandering through at the same rate they always did. Things have changed, and I think changed permanently, by the way. And that isn't a bad thing. That isn't a doomsday thing. It's just there has been some changes. So, one of the things that I'm asking my clients not to do right now is I think we've got to get over the COVID connection questions. How are you? Everybody's safe. It's a bit, I'm a high D, so it's just a bit blah, blah, that now, right? It was good for a week. Now it's stronger questions. It's stronger questions. It's like, hey, Chad, when I speak to people like you, sometimes it's like, we've got to move real quick. Or you know what, we should really be talking in a couple of months' time. Which one are you? Right? And that's a strong question. Just to understand, my job is to help you make a great decision, right? And so if my job's to help you make a great decision, let's ask those important questions. That there are some, you should think, I believe Everest should, it's a horrible world. I believe that one of the great advantages in sales is we get an opportunity to think, am I really strategically important to my customers right now? And if I'm not going to be strategically important to you right now, then we shouldn't be talking. There's too much other stuff going on. So we ask those questions. Hey, you know what, George? Is this a strategic conversation for you? Because if it is, we should have it. If it's not, in the current environment, you should really get on. We can talk in 2 months. You should get onto those strategic conversations. And so there's some questions that I like to ask right now, Chad.
I really love that. And I've noticed the same thing, Carlos, that it does seem for that certain subset, that certain group, that decision-making has sped up. And I think that's something that a lot of salespeople are missing right now, that you've got the ability to probably close some deals faster now than you would have ever been able to 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
And as you said, it's those questions that become so important. You sort of touched on just a second ago, the clients. So I want to spend just a bit of time on those clients we have now, because the other thing that I'm seeing, and I'm sure you are too, is with some clients, there's the ability to add on business that maybe wasn't there 2 or 3 months ago. So are there some specific things you're doing with outreach now? And again, we'll get past what we were doing 2 months ago, because as you said, that was a lot of just checking in, hope everything's okay, let me know how I can help. How has that now changed or modified as you're doing client outreach?
I'm a believer that if we bring value, volume follows, right? So I've just been very oriented right now as to finding the 15 different ways in which we can bring value. And if we don't, I'm not working with people where we're not bringing, material, strategic, important value today, because there's too many other. And it isn't like, I'm not thinking from a crisis mindset. I'm actually thinking from an opportunity mindset. I actually believe that what we're going through is 2 black swan events at the same time. This has not happened, I don't think, ever before, right? Yeah, there's lots of, every 10 years we get a black swan. But the oil crisis, along with COVID, it's a global 2 black swan events at exactly the same time. It's changed the way everybody's doing everything. I'm a believer in the opportunity. So our enemy right now is time, because in 3 months' time, we're either going to look back and say, I got all those opportunities that were there available for me, or I didn't. And so let's be really careful about how we're spending our time. If you're a client of mine and I'm not bringing huge value to you today, you should find something else to work on, because we're going to look back in 3 months and you're either ahead or you're behind. You either took those opportunities or you didn't. It's the opportunity cost that's important right now, because things change. The whole world changed, for sure, forever. The whole world changed. But that isn't a message of doom. It's a message of opportunity and growth. And it's just, it happens so quickly in such a crunch that we've got to really be oriented to how are we generating the most value for our clients right now. Because it's never come again. This will never come again. These times we're living through right now.
I love that. Just a couple more questions. We get ready to wrap up on your section here. What I know, like me, you're a student of personal and professional development. Is there anything you're doing to try to stay sort of inspired and moving and growing in that way right now? Have you had a chance to either, dig into any books that you hadn't previously, or any speakers or things that you're sort of listening to?
So I have to say, one of the greatest opportunities this has gave me was it knocked me off all my patterns. And so now I am reading so much more. I read recently, the last 3 weeks, I've read The Richest Man in Babylon, which I've been trying to get around to. Cynic's new book, The Infinite Game. I'm in the middle of a Thomas Edison biography. I read, because I don't know if he's on, Matt Nettleton told me, Thinking in Bets, Annie Duke, fantastic. So I'm reading more. You introduced me, Chad, to Andy Andrews, who I've never heard of before, but has blown me away. So I'm watching a lot of Andy Andrews stuff. And I'm very careful with I believe where my attention goes, my energy flows, right? So I'm reminded of the Mario Andretti interview, where the interviewer said to Mario Andretti, what advice can you give to other racing car drivers? And he said, don't look at the wall, right? That was his advice. Don't look at the wall, because where you look, where your attention is, that's where you're going to go. That's where your energy is going to go. And we're surrounded by media companies whose job, no judgment, that's their job, is to buy and sell my attention, right? That's their job. They buy it from me with cool content like car crashes and plane crashes and death and destruction. That grabs my attention. And then they sell that attention to advertisers. That's their job. And so now with social media and 24-hour news channels, so you ask me, what am I doing to stay grounded? I am not getting dragged into that. I am very careful with where my attention's going. And I am, for example, I wake up in the morning at 5 a.m. and the first thing I do is I write my mission. I started doing this when COVID happened. First thing I do is write my personal mission down every morning. I mean, like, you'd think, you're not bored of it yet? It's brilliant. It inspires me every single day. And it's got better, actually. I've tweaked a few little words and it's getting better and better. So yeah, I'm doing some new things. I'm not doing new things. I'm doing things differently. And I'm very careful with what's grabbing my attention, very careful. And I am writing my mission every morning. Does that answer your question?
No, that's excellent. Yeah. One final question. And then, by the way, are you gonna be able to stick around for the end for a little bit of an open forum?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure.
Excellent.
I can't wait to hear. We've got a Navy SEAL for crying out loud.
I'm excited about that.
Are you kidding me?
I'm excited about that too. So
Yeah.
One final thing, and you already sort of quoted Jim Rohn, but I wanted to get this because I know you are such a student of this stuff. Do you have a favorite quote that you've been sort of either sharing a lot recently or that's been coming to mind? Go ahead. What is it?
So this one has been like kind of really stepped up in my mind over this past couple of months. It is C.S. Lewis. Does everyone know who C.S. Lewis is? He wrote the Narnia books. He was professor of literature at Oxford. He was a fantastic author. A great film about him called Shadowlands. It's not really about him, but he's the main character in it. And he said that humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. And I think that I've been trying to get to all the leaders that I work with. It's like, think about the people in your team, think about the market that you're serving. Being humble isn't putting yourself in a lower position. It's being oriented to those around you. And so that has been in my mind a lot.
I love that quote. And yes, C.S. Lewis is fantastic. I would highly commend him to anybody who has not read his works. But Carlos, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go. If you need to step off screen, we'll have you back here in about 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. So let me introduce our next guest. As Carlos alluded to, we are joined by Marty Strong. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was born in Nebraska. He's the father of 5 and a grandfather of 4. Martin served for 20 years in the U.S. Navy SEALs. And not only was he a SEAL, but he's been through Hell Week. And he also had the opportunity to put people through Hell Week. So for those of you familiar with sort of that initiation that SEALs go through towards the end of their initial training, he ran that, helped oversee that training for a number of years. He's appeared on Fox News, CNN, Inside Edition more than 300 times as a counterterrorism expert. And Martin has written, I believe, 6, and he's working on his 7th book, including the SEAL Strike Trilogy and the Time Warrior Saga. So he's managed to do that. And on top of that, he is the CEO and Chief Strategy Officer for LGS Management Group, a company actually 4 companies put together, including Links Global Solutions that deals with counterterrorism training for the federal government, as well as Legacy Care, Practice Analytics, and Legacy Care Government Services, which are in the health sector. So, and he assures me I can call him Marty. So let me welcome Marty Strong. Marty, welcome.
How you doing?
I'm good, but how do you manage to balance all those things? That sounds like quite a feat in its own. How do you write novels and help run these companies and do all the appearances also?
I'm kind of an idea junkie. As a matter of fact, I wrote down during Carlos's commentary an idea for a "Don't Mess with Micros" T-shirt. So, yeah, I got a lot of energy. Kind of been that way my whole life.
I love that, and we want to hear your thoughts on business and some of the things that you've got going on right now. But for those who are not as familiar, obviously you've served in the military for a long time as with the famed Navy SEALs, and I wondered if you could just share a little bit about how did you end up on the SEALs? Maybe give us a little bit of that background and where your military career went from there.
Sure. So I joined when I was 17 years old in 1975, and probably weighed about 128 pounds soaking wet. And in those days, nobody knew what SEALs were. They didn't have movies and books about SEALs. I actually went through Navy boot camp, then had a guaranteed school after boot camp, which was radar and air traffic controller school for about 20 weeks. And what I ended up doing is going instead to SEAL training in Coronado, California. And I thought they were going to throw me back when I showed up, but they let me start. And I was able to finish training. Back then it was 26 weeks long. It's modified a little bit now, but we started with about 126 guys, and we ended up with 13 original members of that original class in graduation 6 months later. Then moved on to SEAL Team 2 after Army Jump School, and started my career there, deployed mostly in Europe for 6-month deployments for the 8 years I was at SEAL Team 2, and then went from there to Coronado, California to become an instructor at the SEAL Basic course. And at the time I was actually the senior enlisted as a Chief Petty Officer. So I was in charge of the first phase of the 3 phases of training. And the first phase, as you had alluded to earlier, is the kind of the crucible phase. That's the phase that has Hell Week, and that's where you kind of break them down from a 100-person class down to 25 or 30 that really care enough to keep moving forward. So once I did that, I went to Officers Candidate School after getting a degree in business. Finished out the next 10 years at various SEAL commands. Ended up doing 7 months of combat in there as an officer, and then retired in 1995. So that's kind of all of it in a nutshell.
Wow. And so out of that experience and you decide to move into a sort of a career in business. So let me start with that. What caused you to transition as you're transitioning out of the military? What kind of led you into this idea of at some point becoming an entrepreneur? Was there
Sure.
sort of a grand plan there, or how did that happen?
I wish it's one of the few things I haven't planned in a grand way. Actually, my personal life, I'm very disciplined, but to use Carlos's approach, in my micro life, I'm very disciplined. In my macro life, I tend to react to opportunities and jump through without thinking about them too much. And in the case of getting out, I was already injured from a parachute accident. I was senior enough that I probably wasn't going to be asked to go running around with a gun in my hands again. So I had a choice. I could either stay in and do mostly staff work, or I could get out. And I decided I want to become a lawyer. So I took the LSAT, passed it, got ready to go to law school, and a SEAL that had just retired had gone into the financial services industry. And he took me to lunch and said I was an idiot. The world doesn't need any more lawyers. You should go into financial services. And he talked me into it, and I ended up in Northern Maryland when I retired, working for Legg Mason Wood Walker as a financial advisor to high net worth clients, and then eventually for United Bank of Switzerland. So about 7.5 years all in. But to your point about the entrepreneur component of your question, I was really shocked. I had a master's in management and an undergrad in business. I had a lot of leadership experience, a lot of project management experience and training. And I thought I was going to be analyzing the stock market and helping people pick great investments. And I found out after I passed all my licensing exams that they gave me an office, they gave me a PC, and they said, good luck. And I knew I wasn't going to have a salary. It was all commission and fees. But I thought they were going to give me some clients so I could start helping them invest. Turns out I was supposed to go out and find my own from scratch. I think you're probably familiar with that. So at that point, I realized that all the time I spent on my 2 degrees was kind of worthless. I wasn't in a corporation. I wasn't going to use any of those skills. And I started asking everybody for advice. And a lot of good salespeople were giving me advice, read everything, saw every video course you could imagine about sales. And I went out there and started cold walking, cold calling, holding seminars, going to conventions and having booths, just swinging at everything, see what would stick to try to get my first client. So I actually started essentially a startup business, scrambling like that, going from kind of a prestigious senior officer in the SEAL teams with a bunch of fruit salad on my chest to being an idiot knocking on doors and asking if you had any money you wanted to give a stranger to invest. So yeah, that was how I started out as my entrepreneur boot camp.
I know our mutual friend, Brad McDonald, who I've had on this series as well in the past. I think he talks about he was more nervous having to make some of those first sales calls, because he also went into sales than he was, dealing with the Soviets during the Cold War. He got more nervous and upset sometimes thinking about those first few having to reach out and call somebody. So certainly understand that. And then at some point along the way, you also decide to be an author. What led to saying, I think I'd like to write books also?
Well, there was a pretty good period of time raising kids, trying to grow my business, eventually at United Bank of Switzerland. And then 9/11 happened, and I was disabled from my service time. So, I wasn't going to go back into uniform as much as I wanted to figure out a way to get back in and join the fight. So that's where I started banking into the terrorism advisory role. And one thing led to another. I ended up on TV a lot, and I realized that what I was doing had a higher purpose, and making rich people richer didn't seem to be, the right ethical or moral path anymore. So I sold my book of business and put my shingle up to become a consultant, and ended up running around the world, helping countries and helping the United States and large corporations try to figure out how to protect themselves from terror threats. And that eventually led to a job at a large defense company, and eventually to the company that I'm with now. about 4 years ago, I read Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week. And in that book, there's two concepts that I took out. You know, all books kind of speak to people in different ways and at different times in your life if you go back and reread them. For me, there were two things that he brought out, two ideas. One was to live your bucket list now. Don't believe in the balloon payment. You'll be too old, too unhealthy, and won't have enough money to do all the things you want to do. So make your bucket list now and actually go after each of the things in the bucket list while you're young enough and active enough to achieve them. The second thing he did was a discussion about inventorying your time, which I think Carlos alluded to, and then actually going through and inventorying, surveying how you're spending every minute, every hour of your day for 5 days, and then look at how much time you're spending focusing on things that have no real value in your micro life, let's put it that way. And I found that I was a junkie about military and global politics. I was a junkie about the economy and economics and the markets. These are all hangovers from my previous careers. And I was watching a massive amount of TV and watching webinars and reading books about subjects that had nothing to do with my current life or my future goals. So by adding all that up, you decide, you look at your bucket list and you say, well, how much time do I have? Well, I have lots of time. If I get rid of all this kind of useless activity and swap it out for something that's going to, you know, achieve either what I want to do now or maybe knock off some of those bucket list items. My bucket list, unlike in his book, wasn't all trips to you know, exotic countries. I'd already been all those exotic countries, been bitten by and stung by just about everything in each of them. My list was all things I wanted to do, like learn Spanish fluently, learn how to play guitar really, really well, write novels. You know, they were all big time and skill kind of targets. So I actually just looked at the list and said, you know what? I'm going to take the novel one and I'm going to start writing, and I'm going to take this extra time I've had and I'm going to start every morning at 5:15, 5:30, and I'm not going to touch anything else until I've written for an hour. And that's how it started. I mean, that's how I ended up just starting to knock them out. And I still do that same discipline today.
Excellent. Let me ask this, and then a special guest has requested, actually I asked him if he'd like to be a panelist. So he's a guy who used to apparently give you rides around the globe. He thinks that maybe you still owe him some fare or something. But anyway, before I let Captain Brad McDonald ask you some questions, one more I had, which is, what are one or two principles you picked up from being a Navy SEAL, right? We hear about the SEAL code and some of these things that still really stick with you in all these endeavors you're taking on now.
Well, this is going to sound very strange to most people. Because SEALs nowadays are kind of been put into a rock star status, and SEALs have demonstrative personalities when you meet them. But what's going on between their ears is kind of different, and that is good SEALs, and most SEALs that stick around long enough have to be good SEALs or they're, you know, released. Good SEAls are very humble, and what I mean is intellectually humble and emotionally humble. So if you're a SEAL and you're doing well as a SEAL, you're an accomplished SEAL, you wake up every morning and you say to yourself, I'm too slow, I'm too weak, I'm not smart enough in this particular area. You're in constant state of competition, and the thing you're competing against are all these different categories of weakness. Some of them are general categories, some of them are very specific to the job that you're doing at the time. But because of this humility, it's also a sense of paranoia. You open up your mind and become an objective, and you're ready to toss out whatever it was you were taught 2 years ago and embrace a new technology, a new tactic, a new mindset, a new thought process. And what it does, it's kind of like you're rebooting your motivation, rebooting your emotional commitment, and you're rebooting your drive and mindset on a regular basis, you know, almost daily. Because the day you stop doing that, and I've seen SEALs do this, and I see people do it all the time, you're looking at somebody who's locked in whatever the year was they decided to stop. You know, their thinking and their answers and their commitment and their input and participation is, to use today's date, you know, is 2015 information. 2015 approaches to problem solving or leading or directing. And they're useless in a very dynamic environment like special operations or in business. That doesn't work. It's great that you achieved that apex, but the world moved on. The world got more complex. It got more interesting, and you didn't. So I think that's probably one of the biggest single things that I took away from that experience.
I love that idea of intellectual humility, I think is right. Being humble intellectually. That's fantastic. Brad, welcome. You have a question for Marty.
Thanks. Yeah. And I'll admit up front, I'm a Marty fan, so let's just get that out of the way. But I'll sort of put the question to you, Chad, and then Marty and you can chat about it, because one thing Marty hasn't really discussed is his talent with people that much. And so, Chad, if I said to you, your children have probably been confined in the house for quite a while now, and maybe get out for a little bike ride once in a while, but they don't get to see their friends, they don't get to go to school. And if I said to you, hey, Chad, we're going to move a family of 19 gypsies into your house, and you're going to have to tell all your children they're going to share one bunk and make room for all these other kids who are going to use their toys and eat their food and take up the spaces watching the TV in your house. I imagine it might be a little bit of a challenge for you to keep your children happy in that situation. They might not view it as a part of a bigger mission. Well, on the submarine that I was commanding officer, one of our missions was to deliver this team of SEALs to all these dastardly locations in the world to do their missions. So Marty comes on board with his team of 32 SEALs and technicians onto a submarine that already does not have enough bunks for its own crew. And you have 3 men sharing 2 bunks. A guy crawls out of a bunk, goes on watch. Somebody else crawls into that guy's bunk, and probably it's still warm, thus the term hot bunking. And there's no room for the average sailor to really have any time off as it is. And now you've got these SEALs who don't want to be crammed inside a submarine waiting to be delivered. The submariners now feel like they're bus drivers. So you got these 2 groups with big egos, their own very unique cultures. Probably no 2 groups in the Navy feel more like they are the elite than those 2 groups. And now you got to get them to get along with each other and see it as one mission. So maybe you'd like to ask Marty how he pulled that off, because I watched in marvel, I'm not kidding, as over the space of a few days and a couple of weeks on our first deployment together, how he was able to meld those 2 groups into one effective, cohesive fighting team. How's that for teeing it up, Chad?
I love it. I think you asked it perfectly. So we'll kick it to Marty. Marty, how did you do that?
And who was that asking the question again? I didn't recognize him.
And Chad, what I'm thinking is maybe if Marty chats about that, I think he does have some of that humility he was discussing. But if he talks about it, maybe there's a lesson in there somewhere for what we're going through now. That was my thought. I just thought it was one of his greater feats that to other people might seem like no big deal. That's where that came from.
Good. I love it. Thank you.
Marty,
how did you do it?
So when Brad and I started working together, which I think it was mid to late 1993, we were both part of an experiment. Up until that point, the submarine world, the submarine forces belonged to the submarine command, and they had 2 basic functions. The fast attacks that like Brad commanded, their job was to seek out, find enemy submarines, and if necessary, defeat those submarines, sink them, and also to follow them around and to give information to the U.S. Navy about the intentions and the capabilities of these enemy submarines. The other type of submarine was a very large submarine. Its job was just basically to float around in the ocean and do donuts in deep water. And they had nuclear weapons on them, and they were just there as launch platforms. So the submarines would work with us once in a great while. They let us on for maybe 3 or 4 hours, and they kick us off. But at the time when Brad and I first met, the submarine force was actually getting downsized quite a bit. And some of the senior leaders in the submarine community were trying to look for another mission, something that made them relevant. At the same time, in the SEAL community, they realized that the best way to get in to the territory adjacent to a bad guy's country, the shoreline, was not flying in a plane and jumping out. It wasn't gliding over the surface of the ocean in a rubber boat, because radar had been improved and everybody could see the rubber boat coming. It was to come in under the water. So they developed a mini submarine that was great, except that there was nothing to launch the mini submarine from. And the two communities got together and decided, okay, we'll solve each of our problems. We'll go ahead and put this big garage or kind of airplane hangar in the back of a submarine. Initially just the fast attacks like Brad commanded. And eventually they put two of them on the big boomer type submarines. We call them a double barrel battle star. We always call them battle stars. For some reason, it always seemed like spaceships does. So that's probably what we did. We wouldn't have made it through submarine school. We have kind of infantile approach to technology. So there was really two challenges. There was the technology challenge, and there was the how do you mesh these two populations, as Brad alluded to. And I didn't have a playbook. Nobody had actually said this is the way to do this. And so when the forces both met, I basically got my people together, and a good part of my task unit were Navy divers. They weren't SEALs. They were the ones who were supposed to operate this hangar that the mini submarine came in and out of. And they were used to being around SEALs in a SEAL command, where some of the SEALs kind of looked down at them as like second-class sailors because they weren't the cool guys, And I had worked in other organizations in the Navy, and I knew that was an issue, a cultural issue. So I'd already solved that inside my 32-person task unit. I trained the divers how to shoot, everything, throwing grenades, how to drive our boats, taught them maritime operations, navigation, so they could actually drive us into targets. It made them a part of the mission team. They weren't slackers in any way, shape, or form. The SEALs in my task unit believed that they were critical. The divers believed they were critical. And that's the group I brought to first meet Brad and his crew. So a lot of that work had kind of already been done. And kind of to the humility standpoint, you can't get to the target without this vessel and without the people that are either commanding or driving this vessel. You're nothing without these people. And this is the way you should be acting. You should be, kissing their, what, because they're going through, as Brad indicated, all kinds of displacement when you put a bunch of us on there. And he didn't even list all the things we do on a submarine. We turn everything into a workout space. Every pipe that's going over that's critical, we turn into a pull-up bar. It's quite a mess. But the fact that Brad was willing to work with me, and that his senior enlisted person was willing to work with my senior enlisted person right from day one, that was basically everything. Because I'd been on other submarines, and Brad's ridden other submarines, other SEALs. And if that doesn't mesh at the top, it's never going to work throughout the whole organization on both sides. So that's how we started. We started out as critical components of the same mission team, not as an elite, on either side. And I think by the time we did our preparation and then finally did our deployment, we'd spend a lot of time together, anywhere from 7 to 9 months. And that made us even closer. And there's a lot of stories that the statute of limitations have not run out on. But Brad can tell you separately where, we brought them in off the submarine and into 5-star hotels that we were allowed to stay in, but they weren't allowed to even come into port. And we shuttled them back and forth because, we were doing mail runs, if you know what I mean. Until we almost got the entire ship's crew off the submarine. And so we were part of one big happy family. And that's kind of how it happened.
So yeah, I love that story. And so a lot of it was, first of all, it sounded like taking ego out of it, right? You got to take the ego out of it and see others as, being critical to the mission, even though they may not all have the same, I guess on the surface, that not everybody say them the same, but showing them how everybody's critical. And so, we've got to value others, and then lifting people up, helping people to achieve more, to do more, to maybe have things that they wouldn't have normally had. That seems like a big part of it too.
And to the COVID point, we didn't know what we were going to do. We sat there and stared at each other and said, okay, how are we going to build this thing? Our capabilities were going to be the sum result of whatever we could work out between the two groups. And the whole science and art of that particular type of special operations mission was in its early infancy. And so every day was kind of like an opportunity discussion. Every day was, you know, can we push the envelope? Can we try it this way? There was a lot of uncertainty, very little guidance. And I think that's kind of how it is when you get into a, you know, a crisis like we're going through right now. All your plans and all your best laid plans may not be, you know, appropriate anymore. So you have to sit back and say, okay, it's not a terrible thing. I just have to look at the world every day the way it confronts me and start addressing the opportunities. And I think Carlos was talking to that same thing. It's you know, you don't embrace the tragedy of it. You figure out, how do I do good things with my time?
Hey, Marty, am I allowed to mention the name of your upcoming book on this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Chad, he has a book that's not out yet, that's coming up. Suggest everybody get a copy when it's out. It's called Be Nimble, and it's not a novel like his other books. It's a book on leadership. And I was graciously asked, I don't know if he's going to use this or not, but that's okay. He asked me to write a foreword, so I'm just going to read the last paragraph of my foreword, which basically was the story I just told about how he brought these two groups together. So here's the last paragraph of the foreword. Medieval alchemists used vessels called crucibles in their efforts to turn iron and other common metals into gold, a miracle never achieved. In the crucible of an overcrowded submarine with two potentially opposing high ego, high performing groups vying for space, purpose, and a bunk, and probably a cup of coffee, Marty was nimble and slick, and indeed performed a miracle quick. He turned the two groups into a gold medal standard of mission success. Read on and see if he can do the same for you.
Awesome. And then the book is Be Nimble. When will that be out, Marty?
I should be out at the end of the year, right around December.
Excellent. So I've been keeping track of questions that have come up in the chat. Now is the time. We got about 6-7 minutes left. If you've got a question for Marty or Carlos, go ahead and type that in. Carlos, if you're able to rejoin us on video. The first question I've got is for you. Gavin Tice talks about being a Sandler franchise or any kind of a associate entrepreneur can be really tough, especially starting out. And his question for you, Carlos, was, at what moment did you feel like, hey, this is going to work out? Was there a specific moment or time or something that
Yeah, there was. I remembered. Because there was a long time when I didn't know for sure. And I think one of the things that was in our favor is we were Cortez. I mean, we were all in. We burnt the boats. We were doing this. I remember my wife used to get home and my wife used to say to me, so, how'd it go today? I'd say, okay. Any new clients? No new clients. And she used to say, have we got a plan B? And I used to say, no, there's no plan B. Because you know what? If I'd had a plan B, that's exactly what I would be doing today. But I remember the time when I knew this was going to work was when, and it wasn't about any particular business event in my business. It was, I had an extraordinary success in a client's business. I really took that sales team apart, put it back together again, and they were performing very highly. It was like night and day. And it was one of the first times in the first year where I'd actually created an extraordinary, and I could stand back and without being boastful, say, I did that. That was when I knew it was going to work, when I saw the impact we'd had. Because if I did it if I did it there, I could do it again and again and again. And I have done it again and again and again. But I think until that point, there was a lack of conviction on my part. That created all the conviction that I needed.
I love that. And you had a question for Marty. You want to go ahead and ask him since you're...
Oh, I'd love to. So Marty, and I think there's a great leadership for people, for my managers and leaders that I work. You're in the Navy and you've got this opportunity to be a SEAL. And I don't know why you didn't look at that and think, wait a minute, there's more danger, more misery, more risk. I'm guessing no more money, or if it is, there's not a lot more money. It just seems like all downside. And they didn't have to, I'm guessing they didn't have to pay you a lot more money to get you to do it. So many of my managers say to me, oh, do we need to pay more to get people to do things? And I'm guessing that they didn't have to pay you a hell of a lot more to get you to take on an enormous amount of pain and suffering. So why did you do it?
Well, just to be kind of transparent here, modern Marty is a lot smarter than 17-year-old Marty. It's kind of like the Officer and Gentleman. I didn't have any place else to go. I wanted to get out of Nebraska, and I jumped in the Navy, and I just kind of stumbled into each of those schools and things until I got to SEAL training. I wish I could, people have asked me stuff like that before, and I wish I could say I had this grand idea and I trained for it and I thought through all the risks and the upside, downside, and the 75% of every class either gets dropped or quits. It's a 75% attrition going back to 1962. I didn't have any of that going on in my head. I just basically went in there and did what I actually advise people nowadays to do when they go in. Just take 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time, and just try to get through each event. And one day you're going to look up and it's going to be graduation day. Because if you overthink it, you overplan it, you start to dwell on the things you were bringing up, the risks, the possibilities that things could go wrong, or you're never going to get there. So that I didn't have a great plan. I just kind of jumped into it.
Excellent. Just a couple more questions, and I know we need to wrap up. John McQuillan asks you, Marty, in tough times, people either fight or flee. And he's asking, what are you seeing more of during these tough times? And how do you deal with somebody, and maybe this has happened at some point in your career, I'm sure, who you didn't think would be the fleer, and all of a sudden that was their option? How do you deal with those kind of people? What are you noticing nowadays?
That's a good question. Well, other than the humility part, another thing that almost every SEAL has in common is a great sense of humor. We make fun of everything, and the worse it gets, the funnier things get. If you ever get a bunch of SEALs in a room, you're never going to hear any stories about how something went really well, the mission went down according to the time schedule, they were back for dinner. You're just going to hear about all the screw ups, right? So part of that is you just accept that you're not going to win. Not every fight ends up being a win. Not every job, mission, not every prospect you chase is going to be success. So I think part of the other question, when do you know when you've kind of arrived, or when do you know that you've turned the corner on starting a small business, is you don't know it until one day you realize you haven't been thinking about that question anymore. That day you suddenly go, hey, it's been a while since I've been concerned whether or not this was the right move or not. So I think that nowadays the starting small businesses is easier from the standpoint of finding money, and there's a lot of great ideas out there, and the economy is dynamic, and with the internet and all the technology, you can do so many things with so little lift, but people are still people. And what I find is, if you're timid by nature, if you're concerned about perfect performance, if you can't live with 85% success and just get the rest of the other 15% done, after the fact, you're going to cut yourself off way before you ever make it to whatever finish line you were heading for. And that's going to be a normal human response to just normal challenges. You get into something like the crisis right now, people just don't believe they have the capability to win in anything. And I don't mean all people, but there's a lot of people like that. Whether they're owning a business, running a business, they start to second guess all their abilities. And I just think at some point when you get to that point where you feel like fleeing, that's the time you need to take a deep breath, put a Rocky video on, and get into a fight mindset and say, screw that, I'm gonna wake up tomorrow morning and I'm gonna stop thinking about what this is doing to me, and I'm gonna start doing something to it.
Oh, I love that so much. And great stuff. I hope everybody joining and listening in after the fact has a bunch of notes. I've got a page and a half of notes from Carlos and Marty, just as I was sitting here listening to them. So I want to thank you again, Marty. Thank you very much for your time, for joining us and for sharing all that insight. Also to Carlos Garrido, Thank you so much for everything you had to share and all that you're doing down there in Miami. And let me just say to everyone watching, join us next week. So next week, we've got a focus on communication. And I've got 3 communication experts who will be joining us. So Lindsay Germono, who runs Germono Advertising. She is a fantastic social media mind. She's going to be talking about how we work through our social media game in this time. I've got Frances Cole Jones, who wrote a tremendous book called How to Wow. She's out of New York City. She does a lot with PR and media relations, and she'll talk about how to present yourself. And then I've got one of the most sought after keynote speakers in the country, Chris Widener, who will be sharing as well. And so excited about next week and moving forward. By the way, we're turning this series into a podcast as well called Executive Launch. So we'll watch for some emails on that. We'll be sharing that with you, and even taking some of our earliest episodes and turning those into podcast format so people can listen to those at their convenience. But I want to thank all of you who joined, who checked in and asked questions, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Everybody be safe, be well. We'll see you soon. Thank you.